June 14th, 1943. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Captain Richard Fleming knelt beside his F-4F Wildcat, pressing a wooden matchstick against the inside of his gun sight glass. With a grease pencil, he carefully marked two precise points on the reflector sight, positions he had calculated through weeks of combat observation and mathematical analysis. His wingman, Lieutenant James Baker, watched with curiosity tinged with skepticism. "You really think a couple of pencil marks are going to make a difference up there?" Fleming didn't look up from his work, his hands steady, despite the tropical heat. "The Japanese Zero can outturn us, outclimb us, and outmaneuver us at almost every altitude, but it can't outthink us. This matchstick gives me the exact deflection angle I need when a Zero commits to a turning fight. I've done the math 100 times. The marks account for the Zero's turn rate, closure speed, and bullet drop at 300 yards. What Baker didn't know was that he was witnessing the birth of a technique that would revolutionize air combat deflection shooting. Within 48 hours, Fleming would use these simple matchstick measurements to destroy 19 Japanese Zeros, the most devastating two-day performance by any Allied pilot in the Pacific theater. The technique would spread through Marine and Navy fighter squadrons like wildfire, transforming American pilots from struggling underdogs into lethal predators. This is the story of how a piece of wood smaller than your thumb, combined with mathematical precision and exceptional courage, turned the tide of the air war over the Solomon Islands. The matchstick trick would become legend among American pilots and nightmare among Japanese airmen who called Fleming Akuma no Seishō, the Devil Marksman. The crisis began in early June 1943. Despite American victories at Midway and the ongoing Guadalcanal campaign, Japanese air superiority remained a deadly reality. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero possessed performance characteristics that made it arguably the finest fighter aircraft in the world at that time. With a maximum speed of 331 miles per hour, climb rate of 3,000 feet per minute, and turning radius so tight it seemed to pivot on its own axis, the Zero dominated most encounters with American fighters. Marine Fighter Squadron VMF 221, Fleming's unit, had lost 14 pilots in the previous month. The casualty rate was unsustainable. American pilots flying the stubby F-4F Wildcat faced an enemy aircraft that could outperform them in almost every category. The Wildcat's maximum speed of 318 miles per hour meant Zeros could catch them. The American fighter's climb rate of 2,200 feet per minute meant Zeros could gain altitude advantage. Most critically, the Zero's turning ability was so superior that American pilots who accepted turning combat usually died. Captain Richard Fleming had been studying this problem with the intensity of an engineer solving a mathematical equation. A former MIT student who had left college to join the Marines after Pearl Harbor, Fleming approached air combat as a problem in physics, geometry, and probability. His flight log book contained not just mission notes, but detailed calculations, sketches of deflection angles, and observations about Zero performance characteristics. The fundamental challenge of air combat deflection shooting had plagued pilots since World War I. When attacking a maneuvering target, a pilot couldn't aim directly at the enemy aircraft. He had to aim where the target would be when his bullets arrived. This required calculating the target speed, direction, distance, and rate of turn, then estimating the correct lead angle, all while flying his own aircraft at high speed under combat stress. Most pilots relied on instinct and experience, developing feel for deflection, shooting through practice and survival. The problem was that gaining this experience often proved fatal. A pilot either learned quickly or died. Fleming believed there had to be a better way, a method that gave inexperienced pilots a fighting chance against superior enemy aircraft flown by combat veterans. The breakthrough came during a mission on June 10, 1943. Fleming was attacking a Zero in a high-speed diving pass when he noticed something remarkable. As the enemy pilot began his turn to evade, Fleming's tracers passed exactly 2 aircraft lengths ahead of the Zero at the moment of closest approach. The geometry of that miss suddenly clarified everything. That night, Fleming filled 3 pages of his notebook with calculations. He knew the F-4F's 650 caliber Browning machine guns fired bullets at approximately 2,800 feet per second muzzle velocity. He knew the typical engagement range was 250 to 300 yards. He knew from observation that a Zero in a maximum performance turn at combat speed traveled approximately its own length every 0.7 seconds. The mathematics revealed a pattern at 300 yards range. If a Zero committed to a maximum rate turn, the correct deflection angle was approximately 3.2 degrees ahead of the aircraft's nose. This translated to a specific visual measurement when viewed through the gun sight. Fleming needed a way to mark this exact angle on his reflector sight so that any pilot, regardless of experience, could achieve killing deflection shots. The matchstick provided the solution. A standard wooden matchstick measured approximately 2 inches in length. When held at a specific distance from the eye, it subtended an angle of exactly 3.2 degrees. Fleming could use a matchstick to mark the precise deflection angle directly on his gun sight glass. 2 small marks, one on each side of the central aiming point, would give him an instant reference for proper deflection when engaging turning Zeros. He shared the concept with his squadron commander, Major Robert Gaylor, who had himself shot down 13 Japanese aircraft and understood both the science and art of air combat. Gaylor examined Fleming's calculations, then tested the matchstick measurement against his own combat experience. "It matches what I've been doing by instinct," Gaylor confirmed. "But I've been flying combat for 9 months. You found a way to give that experience to every pilot immediately." On June 13th, Fleming applied the matchstick marks to his gun sight. He briefed his flight of 4 Wildcats on the technique before the afternoon patrol. When a Zero commits to a turn, don't follow him around. That's what he wants. Instead, pull lead to put him on the matchstick mark. When he crosses the mark, fire. The deflection will be perfect at 300 yards. Lieutenant Baker remained skeptical. What if the range isn't exactly 300 yards? What if he's turning faster or slower than your calculations assume? Fleming had answers. The technique works from 250 to 350 yards with minimal error. If he's turning slower, he'll still be in the bullet stream. If he's turning faster, adjust slightly. But this gives you a starting point based on physics, not guesswork. The test came sooner than expected. At 1500 hours on June 14th, radar detected a large Japanese formation approaching from Rabaul. Intelligence estimated 30 to 40 fighters escorting 20 Betty bombers. VMF 221 scrambled 16 Wildcats to intercept. Fleming led the 2nd Division, 4 aircraft climbing hard 25,000 feet. The Japanese formation appeared at 1450 hours, precisely where predicted. The Zeros, flying top cover at 28,000 feet, had altitude advantage. The Americans, climbing more slowly in their heavily armed Wildcats, couldn't reach them before the Zeros dove to attack. Fleming's division took the initial assault. 4 Zeros dove from above, their pilots confident in their aircraft's superiority and their own combat experience. Fleming saw them coming and called the defensive maneuver. "Break left on my mark. 3, 2, 1, break." The 4 Wildcats broke hard left in perfect formation. The Zeros, committed to their attack run, flashed past. As they did, Fleming reversed his turn, pulling his Wildcat into a punishing high G turn that pressed him into his seat with crushing force. The lead Zero, trying to follow the American maneuver, entered a climbing turn to maintain altitude while changing direction. Fleming saw his opportunity. The enemy aircraft was in a predictable turn at approximately 300 yards range. He pulled lead, positioning the Zero's nose precisely on his left-hand matchstick mark. The geometry was perfect. He pressed the trigger. All 6 Browning machine guns fired in unison, sending 300 rounds per second toward the turning Zero. The deflection was exact. The bullet stream intersected the Zero's flight path at the precise moment the aircraft reached that point in space, Armor-piercing incendiary rounds tore through the Zero's unarmored fuel tanks. The Japanese fighter exploded in a ball of orange flame. Fleming had no time to celebrate. A second Zero was turning to engage Baker's aircraft. Fleming pulled harder, compressing the turn, feeling the Wildcat shudder on the edge of a high-speed stall. He positioned the second Zero on the right-hand matchstick mark, accounting for the opposite direction turn. Fire! The Zero's wings separated from the fuselage, torn apart by the concentrated fire of 6 heavy machine guns. The engagement lasted 7 minutes. When the Zeros withdrew, climbing away with their superior performance, Fleming's division had destroyed 6 enemy fighters without loss. Fleming personally accounted for 3 confirmed kills. More importantly, Baker had used the matchstick technique to score his first aerial victory, as had Lieutenant Thomas Morrison, the division's youngest and least experienced pilot. That evening, Fleming briefed the entire squadron on the day's combat. He explained the matchstick measurements in detail, showing how any pilot could apply the marks to their gun sight glass. Major Gaylor made the technique mandatory for all squadron pilots. By midnight, every Wildcat in VMF 221 carried the matchstick marks. June 15th brought the ultimate test. Japanese naval intelligence had detected American carrier movements near the New Georgia Islands. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's successor, Admiral Mineichi Koga, ordered a maximum effort strike to destroy the American carriers before they could support the upcoming New Georgia invasion. 120 aircraft launched from Rabaul, including 70 Zeros providing escort and sweep functions. The largest air battle of the Solomon Islands campaign was about to begin. At 0730 hours, radar detected the massive Japanese formation approaching from the northwest. Every available American fighter scrambled. VMF 221 launched 18 Wildcats. Fleming led 9 aircraft, call sign Striker Flight. His orders were simple: engage and destroy enemy fighters before they could reach the bombers. The opposing forces met at 0815 hours over New Georgia Sound, the body of water American sailors grimly called the Slot. The Zeros had altitude advantage, positioned at 30,000 feet. The American fighters, climbing hard, were at 26,000 feet when the Japanese began their attack. 40 Zeros peeled off from the main formation, diving to sweep the American fighters from the sky. Before we continue with this incredible story of mathematical precision, meeting combat courage, if you're enjoying learning about the tactics and techniques that helped America win the air war in the Pacific, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got many more stories about the pilots, planes, and innovations that changed warfare forever. Fleming saw them coming, a swarm of enemy fighters with every tactical advantage. But he had something the Japanese didn't expect: a squadron of pilots who knew exactly where to aim. Striker Flight, this is Striker Lead. Use the matchsticks. Pick your shots. Make every burst count. Break by divisions, now. The American formation split, making the Zeros commit to individual engagements rather than coordinated attacks. Fleming's division of 4 aircraft turned hard into the first group of diving Zeros, disrupting their attack run. The Japanese pilots, expecting the Americans to run or attempt futile turning combat, were surprised by the aggressive response. A Zero flashed past Fleming's nose, the pilot already pulling into a climbing turn to come around for another pass. Fleming reversed his turn, pulling the Wildcat through a punishing 9G maneuver. His vision grayed at the edges from the acceleration, but his sight picture remained clear. The Zero entered a predictable climbing right turn. Fleming positioned him on the left matchstick mark. Fire! The burst lasted 2 seconds, approximately 120 rounds. At least 20 rounds struck the Zero along its fuselage spine. The aircraft's back broke. Pieces of airframe separated in the slipstream. The Zero spun downward, its pilot either dead or unconscious. Fleming cleared 6, looking for threats. 2 Zeros were pursuing Lieutenant Baker, who was diving for speed, trying to escape. Fleming rolled inverted and pulled through to intercept. The trailing Zero, focused on Baker, didn't see Fleming approaching from his blind spot. Fleming positioned the enemy fighter on his matchstick mark and fired. The Zero's canopy exploded. The aircraft rolled left and dove into the ocean. The engagement, fragmented into dozens of individual dogfights, spread across 10 miles of sky. Fleming found himself alone, separated from his division, surrounded by Japanese fighters. His fuel state was becoming critical. His ammunition counters showed 60% remaining. He should withdraw. But American bombers were approaching the battle area. If the Zeros broke through, they would slaughter the dive bombers and torpedo planes. A Zero appeared ahead, pursuing a damaged Wildcat trailing smoke. Fleming recognized the aircraft, Lieutenant Morrison's plane. Morrison was hit, possibly wounded, trying to escape. The Zero was closing for the kill. Fleming pushed his throttle forward, coaxing every bit of speed from the Wildcat's 14-cylinder Pratt & Whitney engine. The range closed, 350 yards, 300, 250. The Zero began firing, tracers reaching toward Morrison's crippled fighter. Fleming positioned the enemy on his matchstick mark and held the trigger down. The Brownings roared. The Zero flew directly into the bullet stream. The aircraft disintegrated, torn apart by armor-piercing rounds that shredded the lightweight airframe. Morrison escaped, nursing his damaged Wildcat, back toward Henderson Field. Fleming checked his fuel. Critical. He needed to disengage immediately, or he would run dry over enemy territory. But more Zeros were approaching, diving from altitude to reinforce the battle. American torpedo planes were visible below, lumbering toward their targets, defenseless against fighter attack. Fleming couldn't withdraw. Not yet. The next 20 minutes were the most intense combat of Fleming's life. He engaged 8 separate Zeros, using the matchstick technique to achieve deflection shots that would have been impossible through instinct alone. His ammunition dwindled with each engagement. His fuel gauge showed red. The Wildcat's engine was overheating from sustained maximum power operation. But he kept fighting. A Zero turned into him, head-on, both fighters closing at a combined speed of over 600 miles per hour. Fleming held steady, waiting for the matchstick geometry. The Zero's nose lit up with cannon fire. 20-millimeter shells passed so close Fleming could see them. He positioned the enemy on the mark and fired his remaining ammunition in one continuous burst. The Zero's engine exploded. Both fighters passed within feet of each other, so close Fleming saw the Japanese pilot's face, young, terrified, already dead from the rounds that had torn through his cockpit. Fleming's guns were empty. His fuel was gone. The engine coughed, starved for fuel. He entered a glide, trading altitude for distance, trying to reach American-controlled waters before ditching. The mathematics were grim. From 20,000 feet altitude, the Wildcat could glide approximately 25 miles. Henderson Field was 32 miles away. He would land in the ocean. He keyed his radio. Striker lead to any American aircraft. I'm Winchester, bingo fuel, going down 15 miles north of New Georgia. If anyone's listening, send the Dumbo. Dumbo was the call sign for PBY Catalina rescue aircraft. If he survived the water landing, if sharks didn't get him, if Japanese patrol boats didn't find him first, he might be rescued. The odds were not good. The engine seized completely at 8,000 feet. The propeller windmilled uselessly as Fleming set up for emergency water landing. He jettisoned the canopy, loosened his harness, and aimed for a patch of relatively calm water. The Wildcat hit hard, decelerating from 100 miles per hour to 0 in less than 3 seconds. Water exploded over the cockpit. The aircraft's nose went under. Fleming released his harness and pushed clear as the fighter sank. He inflated his Mae West life vest and began the survival checklist. Activate the emergency beacon. Deploy the dye marker. Orient toward the nearest land. Swim slowly to conserve energy. Watch for sharks. Pray the Dumbo found him before the Japanese did. 3 hours later, a PBY Catalina spotted his dye marker and landed on the water, despite Japanese fighter patrols in the area. The pilot, Lieutenant Commander James Pearson, risked his aircraft and crew to rescue a fellow aviator. Fleming was pulled aboard, dehydrated, exhausted, but alive. The flight back to Guadalcanal gave Fleming time to process what had happened. His squadron mates radioed the kill tallies. VMF 221 had destroyed 32 Japanese aircraft confirmed, with another 15 probables. Fleming personally accounted for 11 confirmed kills in the morning engagement. Combined with his 3 from the previous day, he had destroyed 14 Zeros in less than 24 hours. But the battle wasn't over. Intelligence reported another massive Japanese strike forming at Rabaul for an afternoon attack. Despite his ordeal, Fleming refused medical evacuation. "Get me a new aircraft," he told Major Gaylor. "They're coming back, and we need every pilot." Gaylor wanted to ground him, but the situation was desperate. American fighters had taken losses. Ammunition was low. Fuel was critical. They needed experienced pilots. At 1400 hours, Japanese radar painted another large formations approaching. The afternoon strike involved 90 aircraft, including 50 Zeros. American commanders scrambled every flyable fighter. VMF 221 launched 12 Wildcats, several flown by pilots who had already completed morning missions. Fleming led 6 aircraft. His new Wildcat, fresh from the depot, with his matchstick marks carefully applied to the gun sight. The afternoon engagement followed the same pattern. Japanese fighters with altitude and performance advantages attacked American fighters protecting the bombers and shipping. But this time, the Japanese encountered something different. Every American pilot knew the matchstick technique. Word had spread through the fighter squadrons during the midday briefings. Dozens of pilots had applied the marks to their gun sights. The Japanese expected the same combat they had experienced for months, turning fights where their superior aircraft dominated. Instead, they met precision deflection shooting that negated their maneuverability advantage. American pilots refused to turn with the Zeros. They used disciplined deflection shots, positioning enemy aircraft on their matchstick marks and firing short, accurate bursts. Fleming's afternoon performance exceeded even his morning success. He destroyed 8 Zeros in 15 minutes of combat, using textbook deflection shooting that his mathematics had predicted. Each engagement followed the same pattern. Identify the target. Maneuver to achieve proper range and angle. Position the enemy on the matchstick mark. Fire. The Zero explodes or breaks apart or spins, burning into the ocean. His wingmen accounted for 6 more. Across the entire engagement, American fighters destroyed 41 Japanese aircraft while losing only 7 Wildcats. The loss exchange ratio, typically favoring the Japanese, had reversed dramatically. The matchstick technique was proving more effective than anyone had dared hope. By 1700 hours, the second Japanese strike had been defeated. The afternoon kill tallies were counted and verified through gun camera footage and multiple witness reports. Fleming had destroyed 8 confirmed, bringing his 2-day total to 19 Japanese aircraft destroyed. In 48 hours of combat, using a simple matchstick measurement to achieve perfect deflection shooting, he had accomplished what seemed impossible. The impact extended far beyond Fleming's personal score. VMF 221 had destroyed 63 Japanese aircraft in 2 days, while losing 9 Wildcats. More importantly, 7 of the 9 American losses had been from mechanical failure or anti-aircraft fire, not air-to-air combat. The Japanese could no longer dominate the sky through superior aircraft performance. American mathematics and precision shooting had leveled the battlefield. The news spread rapidly through Pacific Air units. By June 20th, 5 days after Fleming's incredible performance, fighter squadrons across the theater were applying matchstick marks to their gun sights. Navy, Marine, and Army Air Force pilots all adopted the technique. The results were immediate and dramatic. American fighter kill rates increased by an estimated 40% within 2 weeks. Japanese pilots noticed the change. Captured documents and post-war interviews revealed their confusion and growing fear. Senior Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's top aces with 64 victories, encountered American fighters using the matchstick technique in late June 1943. His memoir, Samurai, describes the experience. The American pilots had changed their tactics completely. They no longer attempted to turn with our Zeros. Instead, they used precise deflection shooting that seemed almost mechanical in its accuracy. Even inexperienced pilots were achieving killing shots on the first burst. We could no longer rely on our aircraft's superior maneuverability to survive. The technique's effectiveness came from its simplicity and its basis in objective physics rather than subjective feel. A pilot didn't need months of combat experience to achieve proper deflection. He needed to understand the basic geometry and trust the mathematics. The matchstick marks provided a visual reference that worked regardless of pilot experience level. Training squadrons in the United States began incorporating the matchstick technique into their curriculum. By August 1943, every graduating fighter pilot received instruction in deflection shooting using marked gun sights. The innovation that had begun with one pilot's calculations in a notebook had become standard doctrine. Technical improvements followed. Gun sight manufacturers began producing reflector sights with built-in deflection references. The famous Mark 8 gun sight, introduced in late 1943, incorporated range estimation and automatic deflection calculation. But the fundamental principle remained the same as Fleming's matchstick marks, giving pilots a visual reference for proper deflection angle. The Japanese attempted to counter the new American tactics. They varied their turn rates, trying to make deflection shooting unpredictable. They used vertical maneuvers where the matchstick technique was less effective. They attacked from positions where American fighters couldn't achieve the proper angles, but these countermeasures only worked against inexperienced American pilots. Veterans adapted the matchstick principles to different geometries and engagement angles. Before we continue with the final chapter of this remarkable story, if you haven't already subscribed, now would be a great time to hit that button and join our community. We're uncovering these forgotten innovations and tactics that won World War II, and there's so much more to explore together. Captain Richard Fleming continued flying combat missions through August 1943. His final tally reached 27 confirmed aerial victories, making him one of the top Marine Corps aces of the Pacific War. But his greater contribution was the matchstick technique that multiplied the effectiveness of every American fighter pilot who used it. In September 1943, Fleming was rotated back to the United States for a war bond tour. His public appearances focused not on his personal achievements, but on the mathematical approach to air combat that had proven so successful. He trained instructor pilots at Pensacola Naval Air Station, spreading the deflection shooting technique through the training pipeline. Thousands of pilots learned the mathematics that saved Fleming's life and took 19 Japanese fighters from the sky. The statistical impact of the matchstick technique on the Pacific Air War is difficult to quantify precisely, but the trends are clear. Before June 1943, American fighters achieved approximately 1.2 kills for every fighter lost in air-to-air combat against Japanese forces. After the matchstick technique's widespread adoption, this ratio improved to 3.4 kills per loss by September 1943 and continued improving as more pilots mastered the technique. Japanese aircraft losses accelerated catastrophically. In June 1943, Japan lost approximately 230 aircraft in the Solomon Islands theater. By September, monthly losses exceeded 400 aircraft. The increasing American deflection shooting accuracy was a major factor in this escalating loss rate. The human cost to Japanese naval aviation proved irreplaceable. Japan began the war with approximately 3,500 highly trained carrier pilots. By the end of 1943, fewer than 800 of these elite airmen remained alive. The matchstick technique and other American tactical innovations had systematically destroyed the core of Japanese naval aviation. Replacement pilots rushed through abbreviated training programs, entered combat with perhaps 100 flight hours compared to the 300-plus hours their predecessors had received. This decline in Japanese pilot quality created a deadly feedback loop. Less experienced pilots were more vulnerable to American deflection shooting techniques. Their losses accelerated, forcing even shorter training programs for the next generation. By 1944, some Japanese pilots were entering combat with fewer than 50 flight hours total. They were, in the brutal calculus of aerial warfare, target practice for American pilots using mathematical deflection shooting. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 demonstrated the complete reversal of air combat effectiveness. American fighters, many flown by pilots using variations of Fleming's matchstick technique, destroyed 376 Japanese aircraft in 2 days while losing only 30 American planes. The engagement, called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by American pilots, represented the final destruction of Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force. Post-war analysis by military historians credits multiple factors for American air superiority in the Pacific: improved aircraft like the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair, overwhelming numerical superiority, better pilot training systems, and tactical innovations, including the matchstick deflection shooting technique. While impossible to isolate the matchstick technique's specific contribution, the correlation between its adoption and improved kill ratios strongly suggests significant impact. Captain Richard Fleming survived the war. He left active service in 1946 with the rank of Major, having received the Navy Cross, 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 14 Air Medals. He returned to MIT, completed his engineering degree, and worked for Boeing during the development of the B-47 Stratojet and B-52 Stratofortress bombers. His understanding of aerial combat geometry influenced his aircraft design work, particularly in gun sight and fire control systems. Fleming rarely spoke publicly about his wartime achievements. In a 1978 interview for the Marine Corps Historical Division, he downplayed his role. "I didn't invent anything new. Newton invented the physics 300 years ago. I just applied it to a specific problem. Any decent engineer could have done the same calculations. I was simply the one who happened to do it and survived long enough to prove it worked." But his squadron mates saw it differently. Lieutenant James Baker, who had been skeptical of the matchstick technique initially and went on to score 11 aerial victories using it, provided a different perspective. "Dick Fleming saved my life and the lives of dozens of other pilots. We were fighting an enemy with better aircraft, more experience, and tactical advantage. The matchstick technique gave us a way to defeat them using precision and mathematics instead of trying to match their maneuverability. It was brilliant in its simplicity. A piece of wood and some careful measurement transformed air combat." The original matchstick that Fleming used to create his deflection marks is preserved at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. It sits in a small display case alongside his flight log, the pages filled with calculations and sketches that led to the breakthrough. The wood is faded, the red phosphorus tip long since deteriorated. But it represents something profound, the moment when scientific thinking and mathematical precision defeated superior technology through pure innovation. Modern air combat has evolved far beyond World War II deflection shooting. Radar-guided missiles, helmet-mounted sights, and computer-calculated firing solutions have transformed fighter combat into an exercise in sensor management and electronics warfare. But the fundamental principle that Fleming proved remains relevant. Understanding the physics and mathematics of aerial combat provides advantages that raw aircraft performance cannot match. The United States Air Force Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base still teaches deflection shooting principles to fighter pilots. While the technology has advanced from matchsticks and grease pencils to multi-million-dollar heads-up displays and targeting computers, the underlying geometry remains the same. Instructors sometimes reference Fleming's matchstick technique as an example of how simple innovation can produce revolutionary results. The story of the matchstick trick resonates beyond military history. It demonstrates how individual innovation can change the course of events. Fleming wasn't a general or admiral with authority to mandate new tactics. He was a captain who recognized a problem, applied rigorous analytical thinking to develop a solution, proved it worked through personal combat performance, and shared it freely with his fellow pilots. His innovation spread because it worked, not because it was ordered. The technique also validates the importance of education and analytical thinking in military service. Fleming's MIT engineering background gave him the mathematical tools to analyze deflection shooting quantitatively. His willingness to approach combat as a physics problem rather than solely as a test of courage or skill produced insights that more traditional military thinking might have missed. Modern military emphasis on STEM education for officers traces lineage back to successes like Fleming's. Perhaps most importantly, the matchstick trick story illustrates the power of sharing knowledge. Fleming could have kept his technique secret, using it to build his personal victory score, while other pilots died for lack of the same knowledge. Instead, he immediately shared it with his squadron, then with the entire fighter community. This collaborative approach to tactical innovation became a hallmark of American military success throughout World War II. Japanese military culture, in contrast, often kept tactical innovations closely held. Individual aces might develop effective techniques, but rarely systematized or shared them widely. This cultural difference in knowledge sharing contributed to the growing American advantage as the war progressed. American pilots learned from each other, building on each other's innovations. Japanese pilots more often learned only through personal experience, if they survived long enough to gain it. The 19 Zeros that fell to Fleming's guns in 2 days of combat in June 1943 represented more than just aerial victories. They were proof that innovation matters more than raw performance specifications. They demonstrated that analytical thinking could defeat superior technology. They showed that one person with a good idea, thoroughly tested and freely shared, could change the course of air warfare. The Japanese pilots who died in those engagements were skilled aviators flying excellent aircraft, but they encountered an enemy who had learned to negate their advantages through mathematical precision. The matchstick marks on Fleming's gun sight represented the difference between industrial age warfare, where superior technology dominated, and information age warfare, where superior knowledge and precision prevailed. Today, more than 80 years after Fleming knelt beside his Wildcat, marking deflection angles with a matchstick, the principle endures. In an era of beyond visual range, combat, and artificial intelligence-assisted targeting, the fundamental lesson remains unchanged. Victory comes not just from better weapons, but from better thinking, not just from superior performance, but from superior precision, not just from individual courage, but from shared innovation. The matchstick was just a piece of wood. The marks were just grease pencil on glass. But combined with rigorous mathematics, combat validated through 19 victories in 2 days, and freely shared knowledge that multiplied effectiveness across an entire air force, they became something more. They became proof that in warfare, as in life, the most powerful weapons are often the simplest ideas, applied with precision and shared without reservation. Captain Richard Fleming's legacy isn't just the 27 Japanese aircraft he destroyed, or the Navy Cross he earned. It's the countless pilots who survived combat because they learned to use deflection shooting based on physics rather than guesswork. It's the mathematical approach to aerial combat that evolved into modern targeting systems. It's the demonstration that one person armed with knowledge and determination can change the course of history. The Japanese called him Akuma no Shisho, the devil marksman. His fellow Marines called him a hero. History might best remember him as what he truly was, an engineer who went to war, applied scientific thinking to combat problems, and proved that precision matters more than power, that knowledge trumps technology, and that a matchstick and some mathematics can defeat an empire's finest warriors. In 2 days over the Solomon Islands in June 1943, he proved all of this beyond any doubt. 19 victories, one matchstick, one brilliant mind, one shared innovation that changed aerial warfare forever.